Hey guys, so you might have seen the video we made recently about the typhoon warning system in Japan. So this is going to be an extension of that. It's going to be an illustration of that and also an extension of that. There'll be some more stuff on this video that went on the last one. So at the moment, the typhoon is around the Osaka area, and you can see on this map where we are. So that'll give you an idea of where we are in relation to the typhoon, right? So as you can see, there's a little bit of rain. There's wind of about 30 knots with gusts up to 50 knots, which is, you know, strong wind. So as far as the actual effect that the typhoon itself is having on us today, it's pretty much zero. However, what is having a strong effect on us, and what has been for the last week, is people's response to the typhoon warning system. And this happens every year. So typhoon season and summer vacation is overlap with each other, right? So every year we have plans what we're going to do. Obviously we're still trying to work, but also we have, you know, family obligations and all sorts of things going on as well, arrangements to meet people and all sorts of stuff going on. And every year lots of stuff gets cancelled because of the typhoon warning system. And what happens is the Japan Meteorological Agency are fairly conservative, or very conservative, when it comes to issuing warnings. And so as soon as a typhoon appears anywhere, they start issuing warnings, right? So they sort of overlap. The typhoons overlap. We're up to 7 or 8 at the moment that we've had so far this season. They number them. So the first one's number 1, you know, and this one that we're in at the moment is like number 7 or 8 for the season. But there's also another one that's building out in the Pacific Ocean right now, and it's on its way behind this one. And that's what it's like in typhoon season, right? Which means that they're constantly issuing these warnings. And a lot of organizations and companies and different people have an automatic response to any warning, right? So what happens is, you know, the dojo that we do martial arts at automatically closes when there's a typhoon warning. No one looks out the window, right? And yesterday was slightly overcast, but no wind at all, and the occasional little bit of rain, and that was it all day yesterday. But the typhoon warnings have been happening for the last week. So for the last week, all sorts of places that we're supposed to be going and things we're supposed to be doing have been closed, right? The chain of drugstores that operate in this area all closed automatically. You know, nobody looks out the window, right? Our dojo was closed yesterday. The weather was no problem at all. There's almost nil wind and about this much rain now and again, and that was it. But because there was a typhoon warning, everything closes. So it's just crazy, you know, and nobody thinks about it. So we had some sort of extended family, Japanese extended family, that were supposed to come visit us, and so we'd reorganized our schedule. I'd actually changed my working schedule. We'd reorganized everything for them to come, and then there was a typhoon warning, so they cancelled. And it was like, well, you know, they're driving to see us, so there's no reason you can't drive in this weather, obviously, but no, they cancelled. And then they rescheduled it for a couple of days later, and then the next typhoon came, so they cancelled again. And nobody looks out the window or thinks about it for themselves. And I mean, it's just that's the way Japanese society works, right? That they just automatically have their automatic response. So what you'll also see is there's a dark house over to the right there. See the shutters are closed? That's the other thing you'll see as we're driving around. You'll see houses with their storm shutters down. And again, they don't look outside and say, oh, actually it's not too bad, we don't have to close the storm shutters yet. They just automatically shut them. And we've got neighbours who've had their storm shutters closed for a week, you know, including yesterday when there was no wind at all, right? And a bit of light rain like this now and again, the storm shutters closed. So it's just amazing. I mean, if you're going to come to Japan, and I mentioned this in the last video, if you're going to come to Japan during typhoon season and there's typhoons about, don't let it overly stress you out. As I said in that last video, the biggest danger from typhoons here is flash flooding in the mountains. That's one of the one of the two things that kill people the most in typhoons in Japan is flash flooding in the mountains, because they've got lots of steep valleys, and the water, sometimes there is heavy rain that comes with the typhoon, and that'll come down a mountain valley in a flash flood and wipe out some houses. The other one is landslides. That'll sometimes happen too up in the mountains, that a little village will just get covered in mud, and people disappear and die. So, there's no doubt every year there are some people who die in the typhoons in Japan. Out of the 126 million people in Japan, every year there are some people who die as a result of typhoons in Japan. But as mentioned in that last video, usually it's in a steep valley up in a mountain somewhere, or it's on the side of a mountain somewhere, side of a steep mountain somewhere. So for most people in areas like what we're in here, is that risk isn't here. There's no flooding risk here. There's no landslide risk here. The other interesting thing is too, in some countries, when you get typhoons or hurricanes or cyclones, for example in Australia, we have lots of big old trees, and one of the biggest dangers in cyclones is these big trees will fall over, or pieces of the big trees will blow off and fall down and break roofs and cars and all sorts of stuff. But here, because there aren't a lot of big old trees around, except around the shrines and temples and things, most of what you can see around us here, there's a lot of bamboo and there's a lot of new growth trees. So look at the state of the road. We've had typhoon going on for the last couple of days, and there's no sort of debris on the road, so it's usually rare to come across much debris on the road. So all those risks usually don't exist. The point is, for people who are going to come to visit during typhoon season, don't be alarmed. As long as you stay off the side of steep mountains. Usually what happens there is the ground gets so wet when we get days and days of rain. The ground gets so wet that the ground just gives away and just slides down the hill, slides down the mountain, and you get a big landslide. And the flash flooding down rivers too. That's the other thing. But if you stay away from those sort of environments, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. It's really, they over panic about it, and it's just an automatic reaction, and you can't reason with anybody about it. When this stuff was going on with our family, I was trying to say, look, there's always going to be a typhoon around this time of year. You can't let that stop you doing things, but you can't, as with most things in Japan, if the majority of the people are sort of in a panic, there's nothing you can say that's going to stop that, and you just got to go along with it and go, all right. So actually, one of our patrons sent me a message recently, and he said he usually comes to Japan before Obon holidays, which is these holidays we're having now, and he said, is it it's a good idea to come during Obon, because there's a lot of tourists, tourism, like domestic tourism and things like that. The thing you got to watch out for is during typhoon season, they cancel everything. Yesterday, they cancelled the bullet train between Nagoya and Osaka for today. They announced yesterday, when the weather was still good here, that today there would be no bullet train between Osaka and Nagoya, just based on that cyclone, on that typhoon warning. Right? So they didn't even wait to see what would happen. They just cancelled it yesterday. They cancelled it for today. So to that guy on Patreon, that would be one thing that could mess you up this time of year, because things too like tourism places, tourist places, often will shut down during typhoons. Already mentioned the martial arts, the dojos and the sports venues and all those things will often shut down during typhoons. So that's the thing. The typhoons themselves usually don't create much problem. It's people's reactions to the typhoon that will create problems for you, because stuff will get cancelled all over the place, and people will cancel things they're going to do with you. And I get work cancelling. We get social stuff cancelling, because of the typhoon. And quite often, you can see it's pretty mild out there. It's pretty blowy, but it's pretty mild, isn't it? Well, it shouldn't stop you doing anything. But it'll be like this, and you'll have people telling you, oh, we can't come today because of the typhoon. We're going to go grocery shopping today. My wife wouldn't go because of the typhoon. I was like, all right, well, I'll go to the convenience store and get some stuff, because, it's not a problem. Our favourite, the drugstores here are like supermarkets, and we're going to go to one of those this morning, and it was closed. The whole lot in central Japan, the head office said that they were closing all their stores while the typhoon was coming through. And again, look at it, and they're drugstores, which to obviously some people are really important. But anyway, there's that. A couple of things related to this. One is, the funny one is umbrellas, because Japanese people have a real fear of rain. They don't want to get rain on them, right? They really don't want to get rain on them. And so, the umbrella's a big thing. We've talked about that in previous videos. And you'll see people in these, we've got 35 to 50 knots out there at the moment, right? 35 knots gusting to 50. And they'll go out with their umbrella in that. And always on TV when they show footage, oh, here it is, today the typhoon's coming. And they'll always show people walking down the street with their umbrella folded inside out, right? And they'll insist on trying to use it. They'll insist on trying to use the umbrella. So one of the funny things is you're forever seeing people walking around with their umbrella blown inside out, because they're trying to keep the rain off, but the wind's too strong and it's just turning their umbrella inside out. So that's a light-hearted thing. On a sadder note, this is an amazing thing. We made a video years ago about contradictions and paradoxes. Here's another example of that. At the same time, they take these typhoon warnings overly seriously and go into a panic when there's a typhoon warning on. The other thing that the meteorological agency issue is heat exhaustion warnings, right? And that's the other thing that we get every year. So every year we get, okay, typhoon's coming, everybody panic, everything shuts down. The other thing we get is in between the typhoons, when you get good weather, it'll get really sunny and really hot, right? And we'll get days where it's 37, 38 degrees, when one day this week was 39 degrees, right? The elementary school kids, it's holidays at the moment, but the elementary school kids wear hats to school, right? Most of the junior high schools and high schools don't have a hat as part of the uniform. So they're all walking around in 37, 38 degree heat without hats, right? And it's school holidays, but the club activities continue. So you've got kids going to soccer club and to, all the different sports clubs at the moment, baseball club, and they'll go every day during their school holidays. We've made a video about that once before. During their holidays, they're all going to club and school things and doing homework, and it's not much of a holiday. But all these outdoor in the sun sports. One of our family members recently actually was doing sport inside a gymnasium, but there was no aircon, right? And just ridiculous. And so the other thing that we see every year is on the news, when the weather's sunny and hot, we'll get these stories on the news. Oh, today at a big soccer tournament in Aichi or Mie or wherever, 15 students were taken to hospital with heat exhaustion, right? Oh, isn't that terrible? And we see it every year, because when there's a typhoon warning, doesn't matter what the weather is, they cancel everything, right? They cancel the dojo and they cancel their sporting events and everything else. But when there's a heat stroke warning, now the meteorology agency issue heat stroke warnings and heat exhaustion warnings, and they'll issue those, and they're ignored. They're ignored. So you never have an event cancelled because of the heat stroke warning, right? So they continue with their events, and they have the kids outside. Just near here, there's actually a soccer field, or a sports field, where they play soccer, and the parents will sit in their cars with the engines running and their air cons on and watch from the air conditioning in the car. They'll watch their kids play soccer out in the sun, right, where it's 37 degrees, and the kids are all from the sun. So that they know, the parents know it's super hot, but because the event isn't cancelled, they all just go. And they all, gambare, do your best, they say to the kids, and the kids go out there and do it. And so as a result of that, every year, without fail, we get these stories on the news where, 15 kids were taken to hospital today from this sporting event in Aichi, or, some activity, outdoor activity with lots of kids. And you'll see these images of fleets of ambulances taking away all these kids to hospital with heat exhaustion, and everybody goes, oh, isn't that terrible? But it happens every year. It happens every year, and they don't say, oh geez, hey, maybe we shouldn't do outside sports, maybe the kids shouldn't do outside sports in the middle of summer when it's 37 degrees. There's a reason that they had summer holidays. You know, that in the old days they decided to have summer holidays because it's not a good time to be out doing stuff, you know. And I mean, if it is, you've got to be careful, but not go out in the middle of a sports field in the middle of the day when it's 38 degrees and play sport. That's going to result in heat exhaustion, isn't it? You know. So that's another frustrating contradiction or paradox or hypocrisy or whatever you want to call that, where, you know, on the one hand they cancel anything or everything because of typhoons, even when there's no actual typhoon weather happening, and yet when there's a heat stroke warning issued by the same meteorological agency, I hate that word, they don't cancel anything. You know, and that's frustrating because we see it every year. One of our kids came home the other day after a thing at school. It was before the holidays, and she'd had this thing at school in the gymnasium, and there's no aircon in there. She came home, she had headaches, and she was feeling sick, and she had the starting symptoms of heat exhaustion. You know, it's really dangerous. Before I go, I was tossing up whether to mention this or not because it's very sad, but there was actually a story earlier in the week that there was a junior high school student, and he'd been at an all-day sporting event, and on his way home he collapsed on the way home and hit his head. They didn't seem to know whether that was connected, but he'd collapsed on the way home from heat exhaustion and hit his head, and they took him to hospital, and he died in hospital 2 days later. You know, and at the time they said on the news, it was on the news, and at the time they said, so be careful of heat exhaustion. They say it all the time. But you know, I told you, they always say in winter, they say, don't catch a cold, or they say, you know, now be careful of the typhoon. You know, if I go, I'm going to go and meet someone inside in a minute. When I leave, he's going to say, be careful of the typhoon for sure, right? And they'll say, be careful of heat exhaustion, but they'll still hold these sporting events for the kids out in the sun all day. You know, it's crazy. It's illogical. That's the word that kept coming to me the last week with all the silliness we've had in the last week, where, you know, fine weather but things are cancelled because of the typhoon, and yet you know, just before that we got that story, or just in the middle of that we got that story about that boy. You know, and it makes you crazy. It's the same as when we see people with the kids standing on the seats in the cars and that sort of stuff here. It makes us crazy because, you know, if people want to risk their own lives with their lack of logic, then that's fair enough, you know, or be overly cautious about something like a typhoon warning, well, that's fair enough too. But when people do stuff that risks children's lives, like making them play in the sun when it's 37, 38 degrees, or you know, letting them stand on the seats in the cars, you know, it makes us crazy. I mean, you just got to accept it. There's nothing that any of us can do about it. I mean, some people say you should do something about it. There's nothing you can do about it. That's not the way Japan works. Japan doesn't work from the bottom up, it works from the top down. And it certainly doesn't work from the opinions of the foreigners. It works from the top down. The bosses at the top say what we should do. They say, okay, it's the typhoon warning, everybody panic. And as you can see, you've seen what it's like. It's a bit windy. But they say, okay, everybody panics. But the heat exhaustion thing, they go, oh, be careful, but they don't cancel anything. They don't cancel any of the events. They just say, be careful, which doesn't mean anything, does it? It's like, stay safe. I never understand that. Stay safe is a funny thing to say, and that's sort of what they say. Be careful. Well, yeah, okay, what's that mean? Right? How do you do that when you've got to go to the sport? And you know what Japanese people are like, if the event's on, they've got to go. You can't keep your kid home if there's an event on because, you know, the event's on. They've got to go. So anyway, there's that. Look, just to lighten things up on a lighter note, just before we go, let's remember again about the inside-out umbrella. I saw it again this morning. When I was out. There was a couple of people walking down the street with umbrellas, and it was really windy. I was thinking, oh, that's not going to work. And then as I was watching, one of them just suddenly turned inside out. And then instead of going, oh shit, it's too windy for umbrellas, and put it away, he turned towards the wind so it would turn out the right way again, and then held it up again. And it was only raining this much, you know. It wasn't raining that much anyway. But they got this thing about rain. They don't like getting rain on them. They think that rain's got, every drop of rain has dust and yellow dust from China and all sorts of stuff in it. and they no, don't get rain on you. They got a terrible thing about rain. I tell them that in Australia, huge areas of Australia, people, the only water they have to drink is rainwater off the roof of their house, and freak out when I tell them that. What? They drink it? Yeah, they drink it, and they don't die. Right. Anyway, oh dear, that's what it's like. This is what it's like living in Japan. Again, some people say, oh, you shouldn't complain. Again, our videos are never complaining. Our videos are just explaining what is. No doubt, some of it's frustrating. The illogical stuff, that's what does my head in, is the stuff that's not logical. That makes me crazy. But again, not complaining. Get frustrated by it for sure, but there's no point in complaining about any of it because none of it's going to change. What it is our videos are anything and everything about Japan, and this is what's happening at the moment. Right, so there it was. Anyway, that's enough of that. More videos coming soon.